So now it's my pleasure to again introduce Dr. Scott Howard. And I did introduce you, Dr. Howard, to the audience with some details before, and I'm happy now that you have been able to join us. And you will address the importance of frontline Blinatumomab to improve ALL patient outcomes and the proposal to add it as well to the WHO Essential Medicines list for children. We are so happy to have you, and thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the invitation and the double introduction. I'm so sorry. I'm actually at the SIOP meeting in Riyadh, but it's held in a university campus. And the university has, like many large organizations, this massive security procedure, which I hadn't noticed because I hadn't logged on to anything during the whole meeting until just now. So I'm very happy to be with you. Blinatumomab is magical as a medicine. And let's see here. And I'm very happy that it's heading for the in the history of cancer, there have been a handful of medicines that were as important as blinatumomab. Methotrexate, 1953, mercaptopurine, 1953, asparaginase, 1978, blinatumomab, 2022. And I have 4 things I want to talk to you about. The first is blinatumomab has helped cure many people with relapsed ALL. And the studies are numerous, many publications, many different randomized clinical trials. Here's just one example. And the study is always the same, which is you take the standard therapy here, chemotherapy. This is leukemia. So chemotherapy is the only treatment that's needed for leukemia. And then add blinatumomab. And every time you do this, it's always 10% better, 15% better, 20% better. Really just depends on the situation, but anywhere from 10 to 30% better. And it's not only effective, it's actually cost effective. The big complaint about blinatumomab is that it's very expensive. And it's especially expensive in high-income countries, and it's medium expensive in middle-income countries. And it's not available in most low-income countries. So I was happy to see this cost-effectiveness study in France for relapse patients. And here's the cost-effectiveness model, and it's overlaid on the actual data. So again, the model is the smooth curve. The data is the yellow curve. And under many different assumptions, blinatumomab is highly cost-effective. You can do sensitivity analysis related to transplant, related to the dose of blinatumomab, sharing of the blinatumomab vials, the utilities of the health state after surviving, after relapsed ALL, how often you even have to change the blinatumomab infusion bag, the cost of a transplant, the population age, all these different variables. But no matter how you slice it, highly cost-effective in first relapse. And you see this is the sensitivity analysis where they do a bootstrap. So each dot is, out of these thousands of dots, each dot is the likelihood of how cost-effective blinatumomab is. Everything above this 0 line is good. So you see that there's maybe a 0.1% chance that it's not cost-effective according to this model. But here's the likely cost-effectiveness is right here. 7 years of disease-adjusted life gained by using blinatumomab. So that's first relapse. That's fine. And then here's in Mexico. Mexico did the same exact study, got the same exact result, highly cost effective. And here's red is the benefit in frontline, and blue is the benefit in second line. So this brings me to the next topic, which is frontline use of blinatumomab. It's helped many people with relapsed ALL. It really changed everything for relapsed ALL. But for frontline ALL, we were already doing pretty well, 90% event-free survival. So that's pretty good, but that means 10% left. So we're happy with 90%, but not satisfied till we get to 100%. So what about newly diagnosed ALL? Well, the first thing you start with are the high-risk patients, people with minimal residual disease at the end of their induction. Adults are always harder to treat than children. And in this study, randomized trial of adults with MRD negative ALL, here again is this huge difference in event-free survival and overall survival. And, if you go across here, I know we have a mixed audience, so you don't have to be a doctor and you don't have to be a statistician. The blue curve is chemo only, 55%. The orangish yellow curve is chemotherapy plus blinatumomab, 80-something%, let's say 80%. So a 25% benefit in survival by adding blinatumomab on top of chemotherapy in adults with newly diagnosed ALL. And what about children? Well, children come in various sizes, and the first size is the babies. Fortunately, infants don't get lymphoblastic leukemia very often, but when they do, it's horrible. Well, it has been horrible in the past. And the reason it's horrible is because they get super intense therapy. In the old days, take out the blue. What you would do for a baby with ALL would be induction treatment, protocol 1B, MARMA, OCTAD, maintenance, transplant in some cases, OCTADAD. Each of these blocks is supremely toxic for small children and infants. So we had to give these poor infants massive chemotherapy, extremely toxic therapy. A large percentage of children would even die from the toxicity of the treatment. You could only deliver this therapy in high-income countries and in really excellent centers. This would not even be, even in a high-income country, you wouldn't want to do this in a small center where the supportive care might not be quite the same as a large center that manages lots of leukemia. So what did these researchers do? They added just one cycle, 28 days of blinatumomab. And remember, blinatumomab, the main side effect is it's expensive. But when you're talking about a small baby, they don't need very much each day. And when you only give 28 days, one cycle of small children. And what was the difference in their survival? Just like the adults, from 49%, let's say 50%, up to 80%. So a 30% bonus in event-free survival or disease-free survival, similar, in children and infants who got blinatumomab compared to chemotherapy. And remember, it's not I gave up chemo and I put in blinatumomab. No, I used chemo and added blinatumomab and actually took out a little bit of the toxicity of the chemo. And here's the overall survival. Same thing, 30% bonus in event-free survival and overall survival. And this paper was actually written 5 years ago, and it's fun to read 5 years ago what people were thinking. And what they were thinking is, hey, we need to bring blinatumomab, and this now it's green instead of blue. We need to bring it into the front line, even in patients who have lower risk leukemia, not just the high risk leukemia that had already been approved back in 2022, and the ones who had positive disease after the first month of therapy. But what about the lower risk patients? So what they did was, when it says plus or minus blinatumomab, these were patients who were randomized. They flipped a coin. Half of all the children in this category got blinatumomab here and blinatumomab here. And the other half got all the white boxes, but no blinatumomab and no blinatumomab. So it was either both yes or both no. Same with this group. They got randomized to yes, yes, or no, no for the blinatumomab. Here is the top secret, highly confidential memo, only for regulatory agencies and third-party payers, because the results of this study were so dramatic that even before it was published, even before they were allowed to talk about it, they had to send this memo out to the government, to hospitals, to doctors, and to insurance companies. Of course, it's not terribly secret by the time you send something to that many people, but they were asked to be secretive. That was a couple of months ago now, so there's no secret anymore because these results are published in the New England Journal. Blinatumomab in standard risk ALL in children. And standard risk is the term for the lowest categories of risk, typically. And here it is, blue, chemotherapy, just like we've always done, which is not bad, right? Look across here. 85% of children who just get regular chemotherapy doing pretty well at 4 years. They're alive in remission and probably cured. But adding blinatumomab, again, it's about a 12% bonus. Depends on a few details, but in the average low risk and in the high low risk, same thing. Basically, chemo only in blue, chemo plus blinatumomab, chemo only, chemo plus blina. So again, we see anywhere from a 10% bonus to a 15% bonus in event-free survival, which means cure, in children who get blinatumomab on top of their chemo. And here's just the relapse risk. So now it's good to be low because low means less relapse. And here's 5%, 10%, 15%. So we see that there are about 13% relapses, chemo only, and about 4% relapses, chemo plus blina. So imagine a world in which only 4% of children relapse because they have access to chemotherapy plus blinatumomab. And now imagine a world where you don't have to imagine a world where only 4% relapse, because this is today's world. We live in that world. Since December 2024, this is the world. So what do we have to do now? We have to make sure every child can get into that world. Because, yeah, you can salvage a child. This is the overall survival, not the survival without relapse. And this shows that if the blue people relapse, yeah, you can then give them Blina. It still works in relapse patients. And you can give them transplant because you have to after they relapse. So now they've had a bone marrow transplant, intense salvage chemotherapy, and Blinatumomab, and they can do very well. But they had to suffer a lot more to do very well. So it's better to not relapse at all, and you save all the cost of the subsequent Blinatumomab and all the cost of the transplant and the salvage chemotherapy. And when I say cost, I'm not talking about money. I'm also talking about money, but I'm talking about the human cost, which is very high. These salvage therapy is really toxic and quite miserable and has long-term permanent side effects. So when I talk about cost effectiveness, the first thing is the effectiveness, because the cost of life is the infinite cost, right? So first we have to save that child's life. Second, we have to save that child's life in a way that has no permanent side effects. And number three, we have to somehow find a way to pay for it in money, because we also need to make this sustainable. So the event-free survival is 10% to 30% higher, adding Blinatumomab on top of chemotherapy. And whether it's 10% or 30%, it depends on the situation. In those small babies, it was 30%. In adults, it was 15%. In certain risk groups, 10%, 12%, 18%. So 10 to 30. And the great thing, though, is when you survive a frontline therapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, you have a normal life in every way that you can measure a human life. Same chance of graduating from school, same chance of graduating from college, same percentage having a job, getting married, having children. Anything you want to measure about somebody's life, not just are they healthy, they're equally healthy as their siblings who never had cancer, or as community controls in their school. Children in their same class who never had cancer have the same outcomes as children who had cancer and were cured with frontline therapy. So 10 to 30% more children cured. And these children are 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old. They have 70 or more years of life ahead of them. And like I just said, that is normal life. It's not like they're having to live with lots of extra support. They don't need physical therapy or cognitive therapy or psychotherapy or any therapy. They do, but they don't need it any more than any of the rest of us need it who never had leukemia as a child. And of course, each of us needs some different support as we go along, but it's the same rate of support that they need. So when you look at this, it's not just 70 years of life, it's actually 70 plus disease-adjusted years of life for 10 to 30% more children. Nobody's ever published a cost-effectiveness study of Blinatumomab in the front line because we're all still celebrating that it works so well. But this is coming soon. So now if 100% of patients get Blinatumomab in frontline therapy, the first question people ask me is, will we even have enough Blinatumomab to go around? If we use it all up in frontline, what are we going to do for the patient who relapses? Will we be stuck there with no medicine? And the answer is, it's tricky, but there is enough Blinatumomab to go around. Amgen has really jumped on this because the need went way up now that we know we have to give it in frontline. But the good news is, if you give Blinatumomab in frontline, you don't need Blinatumomab in second line because hardly anybody relapses. Instead of 15%, 4%. Instead of 17%, 7%. Instead of 30%, 10%. So if you have so much fewer relapse, you actually need less Blinatumomab in the second line setting. But there will be a period of time, which is right now, when everybody's starting to use Blinatumomab in the front line, but we still have patients treated 3, 4, 2 years ago who might come in with a relapse and need second line therapy. So for this short time, before we reap the benefits of frontline Blinatumomab, we have to just really be on our guard to make sure there's enough files. But the good news is, in the future, if we treated everybody frontline, we would actually use about the same amount of Blinatumomab as we did a year ago, treating everybody in relapse. It's about the same amount, but we would save a lot more lives. So in other words, the cost would be the same, but the effectiveness would be way higher. So the cost effectiveness would also be higher, because if you raise the effectiveness and hold the cost steady, you increase the cost effectiveness. My third point, and we're winding up here, is that we have to combine Blinatumomab with existing therapies to achieve the most benefit. We do not want to leave behind methotrexate and mercaptopurine from 1953 these are still supremely effective for acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children and adults. And they cost less than $1 per dose of either of these. Prednisone, dexamethasone, 1955, 1958, cyclophosphamide, all of these medicines are terrific. And all of these are already on the essential medicines list, every single one of these except for blinatumomab, which was approved in frontline use for certain patients in 2022, and frontline use in almost every patient will be coming soon. May already have come, I'm not sure. So if we take all of these cancer cells, and the color represents their chemosensitivity, and this is their CD19 and CD22. I'll explain more about that in a second. But most patients, you give them mercaptopurine from 1953, you give them methotrexate from 1953, asparaginase from 1978, all the other classics, and you get rid of that leukemia. Back in the day, still 80% of people could be cured just with the basic classic things. But, and with that, we got really good survival rates. So, went from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the present day, but still that 10% that we couldn't cure. So what about blinatumomab? Well, blinatumomab is attacking the CD19 cells. And if you think this is going to be technical, you are wrong, because I'm just going to illustrate that these cells up here are the ones that have a lot of CD19, and these down here have only a little bit. So if we give blinatumomab, these are considered positive and these are considered negative for CD19. Same for CD22. These are positive for CD22 and these are negative, because you got to draw a line somewhere. So somebody drew a line and said above here is positive, below here is negative, even though there's people near the line on either side that aren't that different from each other. And by people, I mean each of these is a leukemic cell. So now we gave blinatumomab, we wiped out the most positive cells who had the most CD19. Let's give some more blinatumomab. All right, we're wiping out that leukemia. Another, wiping it out. Now these are the cells that are the lowest amount of CD19. One more blina. Hey, are we going to be able to cure this patient with just blinatumomab? Maybe so. Let's give one more cycle. Uh-oh, they relapsed. And when they relapse, all the new cells are low in CD19. So the same story for inotuzumab, which is another very important treatment for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. But now we're killing off the CD22 cells. And again, and again, and again. Maybe we can cure this patient with just inotuzumab. Nope, they relapsed, and the relapse is now CD22 negative. So giving just one medicine for acute lymphoblastic leukemia is a terrible idea. So we are not talking about getting rid of the good chemo and just putting in blinatumomab. So don't get rid of the good to add the great. We want to keep all the good and add the great. And inotuzumab we'll talk about another day once the studies come out. But if we just use those two together, hey, maybe it would work. Maybe we could cure the patient. But instead, probably there will still be some cells left, and we would wish we had given the classic chemotherapy like asparaginase or like mercaptopurine to wipe out this last cell. So I hope I've convinced you that blinatumomab is very important for people with relapsed ALL, adults and children. It's also extremely effective for newly diagnosed adults and children with ALL, newly diagnosed. And we have to keep our old classic therapy until we get to 100%. Please don't argue with me. When we're at 100%, you can argue all you want. Maybe we could take something out and still have enough. That's an argument. I can't wait till we can have that argument. But for now, we need the chemo plus the blinatumomab. And the main thing we need is how are we going to get this blinatumomab for every human? So that's why we put in this proposal. And you have to just list, I just listed myself here, but there were about 50 people who helped work on this. And how do you know? You see that many of them also wrote letters to the WHO to support the inclusion of this blinatumomab. And so here's the executive summary. Treatment of pediatric patients with CD19 positive frontline, relapsed, or refractory lymphoblastic leukemia, because this medicine is really important for frontline, relapsed, and refractory patients. They have to have CD19, of course. And so our team did some math here to say what happens in high-income countries. 15,000 children with ALL, 87% cured with frontline therapy, 7% cured with second-line therapy, and 6% who die from leukemia or toxicity. So we're losing 900 out of these 15,000. But in low and middle income countries, right now today, or not right now today, a few months ago in December, we were losing about 40,000 out of the 85,000 children in low and middle income countries. So 48% were being lost either to leukemia or toxicity. If we can assume universal access to blinatumomab, we can reduce this loss down to 24%, even in the current situation, with the current supportive care, exactly as things are now. If the only thing we changed was yes, blinatumomab instead of no blinatumomab, we would cut in half the number of children lost. So from 48% down to 24%. And here is the other things we have to work on: getting a correct diagnosis, getting a diagnosis at all, getting a correct diagnosis, being able to finish the treatment without abandoning, not dying of toxicity, and not having a relapse. So everything I've been talking about is avoiding relapse, the purple, and avoiding toxicity, because blinatumomab is less toxic than some of the other treatments. But it does depend on all these other factors being present. And you already heard from Annette about the efforts of the Act for Children program. And Act for Children is working on every color here, not just relapse, which we need blina for, and not just toxic death, we need blina for that. But all of these other things are also part of that. And so I also want to really thank Servier for their support for these other aspects, including diagnosis and patient support and so on. So the best time to use blina is in the front line. The worst time is after 4 relapses. So best frontline, first relapse, second relapse, third relapse, fourth relapse. So please, frontline, that's the best line. And I want to finish here with the cost effectiveness in frontline will be even better. Here's the things that are being added to the EML or being considered for addition to be added for addition to the EML. And the period of open commentary is still open. It's open till Friday. Please don't turn in your letter on Friday because, time zones, we're all living in different places. Turn it in on Thursday. Today would be even better, today or tomorrow. And where do? You write your letter, you send it to the EML secretariat at who.int. Or if you want to send an email to me, I can send you some examples, or you can go and download the examples that have already been seen. So I really, really thank you, Shushan and Gevorg, for setting up this meeting. I think this was a terrific idea. It could not be more timely. We need temozolomide. We need rituximab. We need blinatumomab. I really appreciate the WHO. Bente, I'd love to see you over on the St. Jude's side. Welcome to the other family, but I know you're still part of the WHO family because of your many friendships over the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And what a compelling and fantastic presentation. So I took note that normal life is in sight. And I also really like the way you systematically use cost effectiveness in all stages. I think this is the way we need to convince not only the WHO to include it in the EML list, but you mentioned as well in the bypass that, it's also about money for the drugs through the government. And I think using systematically DALI as well is really a way to go. So thank you so much. I think it was a beautiful story, and it will have a beautiful impact when every piece falls into place. So thank you so much.
And I add one more thank you. I can't believe I didn't thank Amgen. They massively supported this application. They provided data on blinatumomab approvals in every country, the cost in every country from public data sources, thousands of hours of work that they saved me by providing these public data sources. They also have a strong commitment to access. They have a whole group called Access. And so this is what motivated me. Filling things out for WHO is a very long process. And I was highly motivated because they said, once we are in essential medicine, it gives us even more power to provide access. So I want to raise my bottle here to Amgen for having an access program in the first place, which brings them nothing. It loses them money. It gives them more risk, but it brings them the satisfaction of saving more lives. So I think we have to always have our water bottle raised.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's also a very valid point. And you heard that Dr. Elbawi André said, we have already mentioned all the partners we have to the platform so far. But of course, we are also working with a more systematic approach to, I would say, appreciate and recognize the public-private partnerships that lies behind many of the sort of uprunning and upcoming drugs. And I think we need to be systematic. And thank you very much for also recognizing Amgen in this case. And we heard also from Manette that she had also a very good sort of public-private partnership.